Chaldeans. After Solomon, the Israelites persisted in their paganism. Political differences divided them between the Kingdom of Israel in the north, comprised of 10 tribes, and Judah in the south, composed of the 2 remaining tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Finally, according to the Bible, because of their repeated excesses, the Israelites were punished by being carried away into exile. From the end of the 8th century BC, to the beginning of the 6th, the Jews of ancient Palestine were attacked by the Assyrians and deported to Mesopotamia. According to the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser, 13,750 of the wisest and most skilled of the Israelites were deported by 733 BC, while 27,290 more Israelite sages, musicians, and artisans were brought to Babylonia by Sargon II in 727 BC. According to 2 Kings 17:16-20, this disaster came upon the nation of Israel because they defied all the commands of the Lord their God and made 2 calves from metal. They set up an Asherah pole and worshipped Baal and all the forces of heaven. They even sacrificed their own sons and daughters in the fire. They consulted fortune tellers and used sorcery and sold themselves to evil, arousing the Lord's anger. And because the Lord was angry, he swept them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah remained in the land. But even the people of Judah refused to obey the commands of the Lord their God. They walked down the same evil paths that Israel had established. So the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel. He punished them by handing them over to their attackers until they were destroyed. Finally, between 598 and 596 BC, Nebuchadnezzar captured Jerusalem, sacked the famous Temple of Solomon, and deported much of the remaining population to Babylon. The Jews would eventually remain in Babylon for half a century, until their release in 538 BC, when nearly 50,000 of them returned to Jerusalem. Nevertheless, a substantial portion chose to remain in Babylon, where they would continue to be an important community of the Jewish diaspora for many centuries. Nebuchadnezzar's capital of Babylon, which at one time may have held as many as 250,000 inhabitants, was the greatest city in the ancient world. According to the Bible, the city was founded by Nimrod, builder of the Tower of Babel, from which it derived its name, and was famed among the Jews and the later Greeks for its sensual living. Herodotus described, Babylon lies in a wide plain, a vast city in the form of a square with sides nearly 14 miles long and a circuit of some 56 miles, and in addition to its enormous size it surpasses in splendor any city of the known world. 22. Once in Babylon, instead of repenting for their past errors, a faction of heretical Jews insisted that the covenant was binding forever, and that, despite the temporary punishment, because they were God's chosen people, they would eventually be restored to the promised land and be appointed rulers of humanity, at the advent of their awaited Messiah. This Zionist interpretation was then assimilated to the heretical worship of the dying God, in which the Israelites had persisted for nearly 1,000 years and for which they were condemned. With the further addition of Babylonian astrology and magic, this new interpretation of Judaism would come to be known as Kabbalah, which was deceptively attributed to Solomon. This tradition is denounced in the Quran as follows. When a messenger was sent to them, the Jews by God confirming the revelations they had already received, some of them turned their backs as if they had no knowledge of it. They followed what the demons attributed to the reign of Solomon. But Solomon did not blaspheme, it was the Satans who blasphemed, teaching men magic and such things as were revealed at Babylon to the angels Harut and Marut. But neither of these taught anyone such things, without saying, "We are a trial, so do not blaspheme." They learned from them the means to sow discord between man and wife, love magic. But they could not harm anyone except by God's permission. And they learned what harmed them, not what benefited them. And they knew that the purchasers of magic would have no share in the happiness of the hereafter. And vile was the price for which they sold their souls, if they but knew. 2:102 The occult wisdom of the Babylonians was revered throughout ancient times as the special skills of the Chaldeans, a term that originally referred to the inhabitants of Chaldea, but which was eventually understood to refer to the Babylonian priesthood. Their practices were described by Diodorus of Sicily, a Greek historian of 80 to 20 BC, and author of a universal history, Bibliotheca Historica. Being assigned to the service of the gods, they spend their entire life in study, their greatest renown being in the field of astrology. But they occupy themselves largely with soothsaying as well, making predictions about future events, and in some cases by purifications, in others by sacrifices, and in others by some other charms they attempt to effect the averting of evil things and the fulfillment of the good. They are also skilled in the soothsaying by the flight of birds, and they give out interpretations of both dreams and portents. They also show marked ability in making divinations from the observations of the entrails of animals, deeming that in this branch they are eminently successful. 23. To the moon, the sun, and the 5 known planets was given the name of interpreter gods, because, while the fixed stars follow a single circuit, these follow each their own course, and thus, above all others, make manifest to man the purpose of the gods. Worship was also conferred on all the constellations, as the revealers of the will of heaven, and in particular the 12 signs of the Zodiac, and the 36 decans, which were called counselor gods. Outside the Zodiac, were 24 stars, 12 in the northern, and 12 in the southern hemisphere. Those which are visible they assigned to the world of the living, and those which are invisible, to the world of the dead, and so they called them judges of the universe. The Chaldeans also worshipped the earth, the oceans, the winds, and fire, sources of all things, which they confounded with the stars under the name of the 4 elements. Also among their beliefs was that the stars were apparently subject to an inflexible law which made it possible to calculate in advance all that they would eventually cause. The Chaldeans perceived the life of the universe as being composed of vast repeating periods. As it appeared to govern the regular movements of the heavenly bodies, the Chaldeans deified time. They conceived of a cycle composed of a great year, wherein the planets were thought to return to their original places. Thus, they believed that the universe was a living breathing entity and could be measured in breaths. The basic unit for cosmic time was the Sos of 60 years, then the Na of 600 years, and the Sar of 3,600 years. A great Sar equaled 21,600 and represented 1 breath. But as the universe must breathe in as well as out, the entire life of the universe was thought to be 432,000 years. Beyond these is the period of 12,960,000 years. Thus, astrology was closely associated with mathematics, numbers being regarded as sacred. Though astrology was falsely regarded as an early invention of the early Babylonians, as Bartel van der Waarden has indicated, in Science Awakening 2, The Birth of Astronomy, its emergence should be dated to the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. 24 before the 8th century BC, as scholars have pointed out, the science of astronomy was basically impossible due to the absence of a reliable system of chronology, which the Babylonians did not arrive at before the 8th century BC. It is only from that time onward that the records of eclipses begin which Ptolemy used, the oldest being dated to 721 BC. But more specifically, those innovations directly related to the cult of the Chaldeans were developed in the 6th century BC. According to noted historian of ancient history, Cumont, it may be regarded as proved that this astral religion succeeded in establishing itself in the 6th century BC, during the period of the short-lived glory of the Second Babylonian Empire, and after its fall. When new ideas derived from East and West were introduced, first by the Persians and afterwards by the Greeks, into the valley of the Euphrates. 25. These developments coincided with the period known as the exile, or the captivity, when the great majority of the Jewish people were in Babylon. While scholars often acknowledge Babylonian influence on Judaism, there is rarely a suggestion of the reverse. However, according to the Bible, Jews had already begun to worship the planets prior to the exile. 2 Kings 23:5 recounts that the Jews offered incense to the sun, the moon, the constellations, and to all the forces of heaven. Nevertheless, Chaldeans, a renowned scholar of Babylonian influences on Judaism, maintains that astrological and other foreign ideas cannot be attributed to the biblical times, but were acquired in Babylon. Chaldeans noted that, it does not seem at all likely that so many similarities could have been formed in parallel independently, and, despite the chronological difficulties of the documentation, in most of the parallel points one may feel quite confident that these ideas were indigenous to Iran. 26. Moreover, we know that the Jews in Babylon had become substantial citizens, and that some had achieved minor administrative positions. Therefore, considering the size and prominence of the Jewish population living in Babylon, and taking into account the important role that astrology played in esoteric Judaism and the Kabbalah, it may be supposed that Jews themselves contributed to many of these innovations. In fact, in the book of Daniel, chapter 248, Daniel is made chief of the wise men of Babylon, that is of the Magi or Chaldeans, and yet remains faithful to the laws of his own religion. A table dated to 523 BC shows the astounding advances in astronomy that were made during this period. For the first time, the relative positions of the sun and the moon are calculated in advance. The conjunctions of the moon with the planets and of the planets with each other, and their situation in the signs of the zodiac, which appear definitely established, are noted with precise dates. The scientific discoveries achieved in this period enabled the astrologers to predict events with a level of certainty that was unattainable through other forms of prognostication. Therefore, divination by means of the stars became elevated in prestige above all other methods known, leading to a transformation in Babylonian religion.